Hi everyone. Today we're going to dive deep into a fascinating question. Why were Vikings afraid of dragons? Imagine yourself standing on the rugged shores of Scandinavia, the cold wind biting your face, the endless gray sea stretching out before you, and the silhouette of a longship cutting through the mist. You're surrounded by fearless warriors, fierce and battle-hardened. But even they had something that made their blood run cold: dragons. And you probably won't survive this journey if you underestimate the power of their fear. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always cool to see where people are watching from as we explore these ancient stories together. Let's get straight to the story. The Viking world and dragon legends. The Vikings lived in a world that was both brutal and mysterious. Their homes were scattered across the cold fjords of Norway, the dense forests of Sweden, and the windswept coasts of Denmark and Iceland. Life was a constant struggle against the elements: freezing winters, dangerous seas, scarce resources. In such an unforgiving environment, stories became more than just entertainment. They were guides for survival and keys to understanding the unknown forces around them. Dragons in Viking lore weren't just fanciful beasts. They represented real and tangible threats, forces of destruction and chaos that could upend the fragile balance of life. Unlike the dragons of later Western fairy tales, which often appear as gold-hoarding monsters or majestic creatures, Norse dragons embodied the raw, terrifying power of nature and fate itself. One of the most famous dragons in Norse mythology is Nidhogg, a serpent-like dragon that gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil held together the 9 realms, the very fabric of the cosmos. Nidhogg's constant gnawing symbolized decay and the relentless threat of destruction that loomed over the world. For the Vikings, the idea of a dragon wasn't confined to distant myths. It was a symbol of an ever-present danger lurking beneath the surface of their reality. The sea was another place where dragon legends took root. Viking longships, sleek and swift, were said to be guided and protected by the presence of dragon heads carved into their prows. These figureheads were not mere decoration. They were believed to ward off evil spirits and hostile sea monsters, including dragons. The dragons on the ships served as both protection and a warning. Vikings embraced the power of the dragon, but respected its danger deeply. Stories of sea serpents and sky dragons filled the sailors' minds as they ventured into unknown waters. These creatures were described as enormous, often with scales like shields, fiery breath, and eyes that glowed like embers. To the Vikings, the ocean was not just a route for trade and raids, but a place where monstrous dragons might rise from the depths to swallow ships whole. But why did the Vikings develop such a deep fear of dragons? It wasn't simply because dragons were powerful beasts in their stories. It was because dragons symbolized the ultimate forces that the Vikings struggled against daily: chaos, death, and the unstoppable flow of fate. Their fear of dragons was a reflection of their understanding that no matter how strong or brave they were, there were forces beyond their control that could strike at any moment. Moreover, dragons in Viking tales often acted as metaphors for human fears: greed, destruction, and revenge. These stories taught lessons about the dangers of overreaching ambition or disrespecting the natural order. When a Viking warrior faced the idea of a dragon, he was also confronting these inner demons and external threats. The dragon's presence in Viking culture was omnipresent. In their myths, their art, their ships, and their dreams. From the glittering shields carved with dragon motifs to the epic sagas that recounted battles with fire-breathing serpents, the dragon was a symbol that shaped the Viking worldview. Yet, despite their fear, Vikings also admired dragons. The beasts represented strength and the raw power of nature, qualities every warrior sought to embody. This paradoxical relationship made dragons not just objects of terror, but also creatures of fascination and respect. This intricate relationship between fear and admiration laid the groundwork for why dragons held such a powerful place in the Viking psyche. They were the embodiment of both the worst nightmares and the fiercest aspirations, untamable forces that commanded attention and respect. As the Vikings expanded their reach across Europe, these dragon legends traveled with them, morphing and merging with local tales, but always retaining that core element of awe and fear. Whether through the carving of dragon-headed ships or tales whispered around campfires, dragons remained central to the Viking identity. So, the stage was set. A harsh world where dragons were not just myths, but symbols of the ever-present danger and chaos Vikings faced, a fear that was woven tightly into their culture and consciousness. The fearsome power of dragons in Viking culture. As the Viking world expanded beyond their rugged homelands, the image of dragons grew increasingly potent in their collective imagination. The fear Vikings had toward these mythical beasts was no mere superstition. It was a deep-rooted, visceral dread shaped by generations of stories, symbols, and real-world dangers they faced. Understanding why Vikings feared dragons requires delving into what dragons represented in their culture, and how that symbolism affected their warriors' hearts and minds. Dragons in Viking culture were much more than monsters. They embodied destruction, chaos, and the unknown. To the Vikings, the world was a delicate balance of order and disorder, life and death, light and darkness. Dragons symbolized the forces that could rip that balance apart. This fear was rooted in both mythology and lived experience. The wild seas, unpredictable weather, and hostile enemies were daily reminders of nature's brutality, qualities that dragons personified. One of the key reasons dragons inspired such dread was their association with chaos and the end of all things. According to Norse cosmology, the final battle of Ragnarok would see many gods and heroes fall to monstrous creatures, including fire-breathing dragons and serpents. Nidhogg, the dragon gnawing at the roots of the world tree, wasn't just a symbol of decay. It was destined to rise during Ragnarok to devour the dead and bring ruin to all realms. This apocalyptic vision deeply haunted Viking belief systems and infused their fear of dragons with cosmic significance. In the sagas, dragons often appeared as guardians of hoarded treasure, fierce protectors of ancient secrets, or embodiments of greed and wrath. The tale of Fafnir, a dwarf who transformed into a dragon to guard his ill-gotten gold, captures this vividly. Fafnir's transformation symbolized how greed corrupted his humanity, turning him into a terrifying beast. For Vikings, dragons weren't just physical threats, they were moral warnings. They embodied the danger of succumbing to destructive impulses that could consume a person entirely. This moral aspect made the fear of dragons not only a fear of physical harm, but a spiritual caution. Viking warriors, who lived by strict codes of honor and valor, were warned against becoming like dragons, monsters consumed by selfishness and destruction. Facing a dragon meant confronting the darkest parts of oneself, and surviving such a confrontation was a test of soul as well as strength. The power of dragons was also visually and culturally reinforced through Viking art and artifacts. Dragon motifs appeared on everything from carved wooden figureheads to intricate jewelry. These images were not only decorative, they were talismans meant to invoke the dragon's fearsome power for protection or to intimidate enemies. A dragon carved on a longship's prow was a psychological weapon, sending a message to foes that the crew was fearless, dangerous, and connected to a primal force. The fear of dragons extended to Viking rituals as well. Warriors and chieftains would perform ceremonies to seek protection against dragons and other malevolent spirits. Certain runes, believed to hold magical power, were inscribed to ward off the destructive influence dragons represented. These rituals reflect how deeply ingrained the dread of dragons was. so much so that it influenced daily life and spiritual practices. Yet dragons were not always feared simply because they were destructive. They represented the unknown, unexplored territories, both physical and metaphysical. The sea voyages that defined the Viking Age were perilous journeys into the unknown, where dangers could come from monsters lurking beneath the waves or hostile tribes beyond sight. Dragons, as mythical creatures of fire and water, land and sky, symbolized these unknowable threats. To fear dragons was to fear the uncertainty that defined the Viking experience. Moreover, dragons embodied a raw, elemental power that no human could hope to control. Their fiery breath, impenetrable scales, and immense size made them unstoppable forces of nature. Vikings, despite their courage, recognized that some powers were beyond even their legendary might. This acknowledgement of limits was unusual in warrior cultures, which often prized invincibility above all else. The fear of dragons was a reminder that vulnerability was real, even for the bravest. This fear shaped the way Vikings told stories. Dragon encounters were often framed as epic battles, not just of strength, but of wit and will. Heroes who defeated dragons gained eternal fame, but also suffered great cost. The saga of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer is one of the most famous, where the hero kills the dragon Fafnir, but is forever changed by the encounter. Such stories conveyed that dragons were ultimate tests. Confronting them was a defining moment in a warrior's life. The lasting impression of dragons as symbols of destruction, chaos, and moral corruption created a cultural ambivalence. Vikings simultaneously feared and revered dragons. This duality fueled their identity as fierce warriors who faced terrifying forces head-on, yet never lost sight of the dangers those forces represented. It's also important to understand how this fear translated into behavior. Vikings prepared themselves mentally and physically for the possibility of encountering dragons, whether literal or symbolic, through training, rituals, and storytelling. Their readiness to face these fears helped forge a community bound by shared courage and respect for the unknown. In essence, the fear of dragons was woven into the fabric of Viking life, influencing everything from art and myth to the mindset of warriors as they sailed into battle or braved the stormy seas. Dragons were more than monsters. They were powerful metaphors for the greatest dangers and challenges Vikings faced, both outside and within themselves. Dragons' lasting impact on Viking identity and legacy. The fear Vikings held toward dragons was not a fleeting superstition, but a defining element of their culture, one that shaped their identity, rituals, and enduring legacy. Over time, dragons evolved from terrifying beasts of myth into powerful symbols deeply intertwined with Viking behavior and how they wanted to be remembered by future generations. Viking warriors understood that fear itself could be a tool. The image of the dragon was leveraged both to intimidate enemies and to inspire courage within their own ranks. Dragon motifs carved on shields, weapons, and ships broadcasted a fierce warning. These Vikings faced the most fearsome forces head-on. By adopting the dragon's image, they claimed a share of its power, even if that power was something to fear. This paradoxical embrace helped define the Viking warrior ethos, balancing respect for danger with unyielding bravery. Rituals surrounding dragons reflected this complex relationship. Before embarking on raids or long voyages, Vikings would perform ceremonies invoking protection against dragons and evil spirits. Certain magical runes, believed to shield against destructive forces, were etched into weapons and amulets. These acts were more than superstition. They were collective affirmations of resilience against the chaos dragons symbolized. Facing dragons, whether real monsters or metaphorical challenges, required preparation of both body and spirit. The fear of dragons also shaped Viking storytelling traditions. Epic sagas recounted the heroic deeds of dragon slayers, immortalizing those who dared confront chaos and triumphed. Stories like that of Sigurd killing Fafnir weren't just entertainment, they were cultural blueprints for heroism. They taught that true courage meant confronting your deepest fears and emerging transformed. The dragon, as the ultimate adversary, became a symbol of personal and societal trial. These narratives transcended mere mythology. They influenced how Vikings understood fate, honor, and mortality. Dragons represented not only external threats, but internal battles against greed, wrath, and destruction. By fearing and battling dragons, Vikings acknowledged the struggle within themselves to maintain order and virtue in a chaotic world. This spiritual dimension enriched Viking culture, making the dragon a mirror of human nature's most dangerous tendencies. The legacy of dragons in Viking culture extended far beyond the Viking Age. As Vikings settled in new lands and interacted with other peoples, their dragon myths blended with local stories, leaving lasting imprints in folklore across Europe. The dragon-headed longships inspired medieval heraldry and architecture. The symbolic power of dragons influenced everything from royal emblems to literature, echoing the Vikings' deep-seated fears and admiration. In modern times, the image of Vikings remains inseparable from dragons. Popular culture often portrays Vikings with dragon-headed ships or embroiled in battles with fiery serpents. This enduring association speaks to the profound impact dragons had on Viking identity. They were not just feared monsters, but powerful icons that helped shape the narrative of what it meant to be Viking. Fierce, brave, and deeply connected to the mysteries of the world. Ultimately, the Vikings' fear of dragons was a reflection of their confrontation with the forces that threatened their existence: natural disasters, enemies, and internal chaos. Dragons symbolized these dangers in a form so vivid and terrifying that the fear was woven into every aspect of Viking life. But through that fear, Vikings found strength and meaning, forging a legacy that still captivates us today. By embracing dragons as both foes and symbols, Vikings crafted a culture where fear was not weakness, but a catalyst for courage. The dragons they feared taught them resilience, humility, and the value of facing the unknown head-on. And that is why, even after centuries, we still tell their stories and feel the thrill of dragons in the winds that once carried those legendary longships across stormy seas. Exploring the Vikings' fear of dragons offers a window into how ancient cultures made sense of the world's dangers, both seen and unseen. Dragons were more than mythic beasts. They were powerful symbols that embodied the chaos and uncertainty the Vikings faced every day. Their stories reveal a culture that balanced bravery with caution, reverence with fear, and myth with reality. The lasting imprint of dragons in Viking art, ritual, and legend reminds us that fear, when understood and embraced, can become a source of strength and identity. Dragons also show us the timeless human tendency to personify our fears into stories and symbols, helping communities face what cannot be controlled. For the Vikings, dragons were a mirror reflecting their greatest challenges and aspirations. This complex relationship enriches our understanding of Viking history and culture, reminding us that beneath the fierce warriors were people deeply connected to the mysteries of nature and existence. So next time you picture a Viking longship cutting through the fog, remember the dragons that lurked in their minds, the forces they feared, respected, and ultimately transformed into legends that still burn brightly in our imaginations.